Our reading this morning is from John's first letter, chapter 4, verses 17 through 21. I always call this the love chapter, and it should be read in the voice of Barry White. It's a wonderful letter. I don't have that voice, so you'll just have to enjoy the beauty of the words. God is love. When we take the permanent residence in a life of love, we live in God, and God lives in us. This way, love has the run of the house, becomes a home in refuge, mature in us, so that we are free of worry on Judgment Day. Our standing in the world is identical with Christ. There is no room in love for fear. Well-formed love banishes fear. Since fear is crippling, a fearful life, fear of death, fear of judgment, is one not yet fully formed in love. We, though, are going to love and be loved. First, we were loved, now we love. He loved us first. If anyone says, I love God, and goes right on hating his brother or sister, thinking nothing of it, he is a liar. If he won't love the person he can see, how can he love the God he can't see? The command we have from Christ is blunt. Loving God includes loving people. You've got to love both. The Word of God for the people of God. Thank you. Let us pray. O Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts find favor in your sight. For you alone, O God, are our rock and redeemer. God is love. In that terse little sentence is the only definition in all of the New Testament of the undefinable, God. In the Old Testament, God is often spoken of as chesed. It's that CH sound in Hebrew. You have to get it in the back of your throat and then throw it out. Hesed, loving kindness, steadfast love. That is what God has for each and every one of us. And I believe that that is what enables Christ to heal. When Christ affirmed people for who they already are, when he met them where they were and loved them, when they were already loved, known, forgiven, it transformed them because love is transformative. And I had chosen this topic for Father's Day because of the love of my father. It seemed so fitting. I chose it before the tragedy in Orlando. And once again, the way the Bible always does, it comes along appropriately with the word we need to hear at the time we need to hear it. This healing and transformative love is something Brennan Manning talks about, and it's so beautiful. I wanted to share it with you. To affirm a person is to see the good in them that they cannot see in themselves, and to repeat it in spite of appearances to the contrary. Please, this is not some Pollyanna optimism that is blind to the reality of evil, but rather like a fine radar system that is tuned into the true, the good, and the beautiful. When a person is evoked for who she is, not for who she is not, the most often result will be the inner healing of her heart through the touch of affirmation. Have you heard that old saw, hurt people, hurt people? Hurt people, hurt people. If that is true, and I believe with all my heart that it is, perhaps it follows then, yes, that loved people love people. If people know they are loved and accepted for who they are, for all that they are, good and bad, how much easier is it for them to love? But I understand from reading and from conversations and just plain old life that that's the hardest thing for most human beings to believe, that they are loved for who they truly are. And so they hide their secrets, and so they have shame, and so they fear, and they project that fear onto others. When I was growing up, I longed for my parents to know the real me, and it always seemed to me that they didn't. Oh, of course I was wrong. They knew me better than I knew myself, sometimes. I remember one snowy night during a storm when I came in from a date, and my hair was long and it was blown all over the place, a little like it is right now. And my father looked at me very accusingly, and he said, "You've been out necking in the back seat of a car with a boy." Well, no, I'd been in a windstorm. I wish I had had the kind of fun that my father used to suspect I had. My life was a bit more boring. But I just was so hurt by his accusation, and I thought, doesn't he know who I really am? Doesn't he know me? And it reminds me of the story of the Samaritan woman at the well with Jesus. Do you remember that story? She was a woman of somewhat shady reputation, and she had to go there alone in the middle of the day, not with the other women in the morning, because the other women didn't want to be with her. And Jesus was talking to her, which was just not done. And she realized in their conversation, as he was talking about giving her the living water, and he told her to go tell her husband, and she said, "I have no husband." And he said, "Oh, I know. You've had 5 husbands, and the one you're currently with is not really your husband." But she ran to her friends in the village, and she said, "I met a man who must be the Messiah because he knows everything I ever did." And what she is saying is, he knows everything I ever did, and he was still good to me, loving to me. He accepted me for who I am. She says it twice. He knew everything I ever did. And that is you, and that is me. God knows everything we ever did. I want you to think about the worst thing you've ever done. Oh my goodness. God knows that. God knows that thing. I want you to think about the worst thing ever done to you. God knows that. God can heal that thing. You see, you are more than the worst thing you've ever done. You are more than the worst thing ever done to you. That does not define you. You are a child of God. You are a soul for whom Christ died. Every single last one of you. And all those people you can't stand. The ones who cut you off in traffic. The ones who really annoy you. Christ died for them. Can you do less than love them? Oh, yeah, it's hard. Let's think about that. Let's let's consider the cost of this loving. Because it's one thing to talk about this transformative love. It's another thing to practice it. God so loved the world that he sent his only son. When people quote John 3:16, don't you wish they'd quote John 3:17? Not to judge the world, but to save it. Isn't that the best part? I think so. But what is this love? It's very confusing in our culture. I think probably St. Paul's beautiful letter to the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, has the best definition of love. And he starts out by describing what the world would be without it. If I speak with the tongue of men and angels and have not love, I am as clanging brass. Clanging brass. Horrible sounds. If I don't have love, love is patient, he says. Love is kind. Love bears all things. So, what is this love? First it's a noun, then it's a verb. It's hard to capture, it's intangible. I always feel it's best to approach love through the senses. But, that means through the body. And in our Christian tradition, we're pretty Neoplatonic. We like to separate those two, mind and body, spirit and body. But oh no. We're coming, I think, to a realization that that is only half of God's creation. You cannot reach out and touch love, but you can touch with love. I had a friend in the hospital dying of cancer, and she asked me to give her a massage, and it was hard. It was hard to rub those wasted muscles and the bones protruding. And the smell of death hung in the air, along with the smell of the lavender lotion I was using. And she said, I can feel the love through your fingertips. I can feel the love. You know the touch of love. You can hear love in a baby's laughter, pure, unforced, and a lullaby. You know when I used to hear love? When the garage door would close. When somebody was out for the night, my children out too late, or my husband on a trip, and they would come home safely, and that garage door would close. That was the sound of love for me. You can smell love in a dinner cooking, a wonderful dinner. I had a friend who was very busy working, and she would come home and everybody would be a little upset because dinner wasn't ready, and she said right away I'd whip on an apron and I'd throw a few onions in the skillet, and the smell of the onion sautéing would reassure all of them. I had no idea what I was going to fix for dinner. Smell love. How about tasting it? The taste of love for me is burned chocolate chip cookies. I know that sounds pretty weird, but my mother, an excellent cook, used to bake wonderful chocolate chip oatmeal cookies, and she'd get distracted, usually by phone calls or somebody would drop in. She was always helping someone, always busy with others. Relationships were much more important to her than what was going on the stove. So she would always burn the cookies. She knew she would always do this, so she had a cookie grater. And she would take the cookies and grate the bottom. She planned on it. And to this day, if chocolate chip cookies don't have a slightly caramelized taste, a little carbon on the bottom, they don't taste like love. But I think the most important way to experience love in our senses is to see love. And of course, I'm talking more about perceiving than seeing, to actually see love. And to see each person as a beloved child of God. I'm serious about this. In fact, it's a challenge, okay? I'd like to challenge you this week to see every person you encounter as a beloved child of God. I'm telling you, it's going to change the way you react to them. You will not flip them off in traffic. How could you? That's a beloved child of God. So when you're waiting impatiently, or when someone just looks like somebody you might not like, for whatever reason, how they're dressed, how they smell, how they talk, look at them as a beloved child of God and see what happens. You and I both know, because we've done it, what happens when you don't look at people that way. I had a woman in my congregation, she was a feisty lady. Her name was Alice. And she did not like women ministers, and she thought the church was going to fall down if after 153 years it had one. And everything I did was wrong. I could not do anything right. Have you ever seen that happen? When you get this mindset, then anything that happens is going to be wrong. And one Sunday I asked people during the passing of the peace if they would say Shalom Shabbat, the way Jesus would have. Shalom Shabbat, holy, peaceful Sabbath. And she turned to the person next to her and she just growled and she said, if I wanted to speak Hebrew, I'd go to a synagogue. She was just really angry with me. Everything I tried. Well, I won't bore you with the details, but Alice and I became very good friends. Very good friends. It took a lot of love. It took a lot of seeing beyond her anger until she was finally able to see me. And she is to this day my dear friend. There was another lady in that church, and she was annoying to almost everyone. I will call her the annoyer. She was especially annoying. There's one in every church. She was especially annoying to one particular lady. I'll call her the complainer. And from the first week on, complainer came in every week and asked me to fire this woman and get her out of the church. I said, we don't just kick people out of church. And she couldn't see why not, because this lady was truly annoying. And she was. She was a real know-it-all. She was not careful about her appearance. And she just wanted to take over everything, and she bugged the heck out of people. The truth was, she had come from a very impoverished background. She didn't take much pains with her appearance. But when she was a child, her family had no radio, no television. They were very poor. And all they had was a set of old encyclopedias, about 37 volumes, which she read cover to cover. And she knew more about many things than anybody else in the congregation, and she wanted to make sure they knew that. So she was terribly annoying. And finally, I had to sit down with her and talk to her. I'd been asked again and again to talk to her and to tell her that she was driving people crazy. And I really, really didn't want to do this. I didn't want to hurt her feelings. I didn't. But I didn't want her not to be accepted either. And before I was to meet with her, I sat down and I prayed to God to guide me. Please, give me the words. And I prayed hard. And she came in and she sat down in a chair. And as I was about to sit down, I had this vision in my head. And it was of this woman just full of love for God and just trying to give it away. And I said, all you want to do is love God, isn't it? She stood right up and she burst into tears. She sobbed and she hugged me and she said, yes. We had a wonderful talk. The next year she became president of our women's group. And Complainer came in and she said after that year, I can't believe the difference. And I said, oh, you mean in Annoyer? And she said, no, in me. The things she does don't even bother me anymore. So love not only transforms that person to whom you give it, it transforms you. I challenge you this week to love someone you think you cannot love. Because it seems to me in this world, that's the only thing that is going to make a difference. The only thing that is going to help us. Christ had a lot to say about love. He really expanded the idea of love. You know, he begins with the Shema, which means in Hebrew, hear. Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with everything you have, your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength, everything. That's the greatest commandment. Somebody asked him, what's the greatest commandment? You know, the poor Jews had 613 commandments that they had to obey. And I don't wonder that they wanted to find out, you know, which ones can we obey and which can we do without. So Christ said, this is the most important one. And there is a second that is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And somebody in the crowd, smarty pants, said, who is my neighbor? And Christ tells the wonderful story of the Good Samaritan, which to the Jews was an oxymoron. They hated the Samaritans. What do you mean, good Samaritan? Only good Samaritan is a dead Samaritan. You know, that's what they would have said. But Christ shows that's not true in his beautiful story. Your enemy, the Samaritan, has goodness. In fact, Christ says, you have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. I say to you, love your enemy. Here's Christ trying to change a centuries-old mindset. Love your enemy. And he goes on to say, hey, anybody can love people who are nice to you. That doesn't take much. The real test is loving people who are not kind to you, who don't agree with you, who may hate you. That's the test, and that's the test we're in right now. Finally, Christ says in John, in his great priestly prayer, I give you a new commandment. A new commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. Wow. He's just finished washing their feet. This kind of love is radical because it has real consequences. And he goes on to say that later when he utters those words, greater love hath no man than he lay down his life for his friends. He does not say this lightly, does he? Or without an example, because that's exactly what he did for us, for you, for me, for everybody we hate and everybody we love. Love one another as I have loved you. You know that's what it means to be a Christian? When we put on that name, when we call ourselves Christians, we give up the luxury of picking and choosing whom to love. That's a hard realization, but it's true. We give up being able to pick and choose whom we love. Because everyone God creates is a soul for whom Christ died. Is a soul God knows, has already forgiven, and has always loved. Just like you, just like me. During 9/11, I was the assistant to the chaplain at Northwestern University. In fact, I began my job there on 9/11. And one of my professors was interviewed about what he thought about 9/11, what the United States would do, or should do. And he was a professor of ethics, and he was on the radio, WBEZ in Chicago, and he said, I think the United States should send planes over, and everybody was hanging on his words, and they should drop tons and tons, and everybody's waiting for, bombs. Tons and tons of food and clothing and medicine. I wonder what would have happened if that is what we had done, instead of on World Communion Sunday dropping tons and tons of bombs. This kind of love is so hard. You and I are going to make all kinds of reasons why we cannot do it. And we can't do it, you're right, without the help of Christ. I can do all things, says Paul in Philippians, with the help of him who strengthens me. We are to love Christ, to love like Christ, and to do that we have to know that we are loved. We are loved. It's so hard for people to accept. We are loved. I'm loved. I'm forgiven. Therefore, I can love. I can see others as sacred, not as others. We've got to stop the othering. There's a conspiracy. And I was so thrilled to see part of it here in the prayer we said this morning, the beautiful prayer. The conspiracy is good people all over the world who are trying to love. Good people who give us hope. I heard on the news this morning, just before I left, that during a service for the 49 people who were killed in Orlando, a flock of birds flew over and a photographer took a picture. Did you happen to hear this story? And it was only looking afterward at the picture that the photographer realized there were 49 birds flying over. Maybe you saw Lin-Manuel Miranda receive his Tony Award for Hamilton last Sunday night. And maybe you heard him say his beautiful poem. I just want to end with a tiny bit of it. When senseless acts of tragedy remind us that nothing here is promised, not one day. And he goes on, we rise and fall in light from dying embers, remembrances that hope and love last longer. And love is love, is love, is love, is love, is love, is love, is love. Cannot be killed or swept aside. Love always wins because God is love. I can love because we are already forgiven and always loved. Amen. Beloved people, as you go from this place, may love be in your head and in your thinking. May love be in your eyes and in your seeing, in your mouth and in your speaking, in your hands and feet and in your doing, and most of all, may love be in your heart. Go in peace.